Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this ongoing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a Tuesday. We have made it to the second day of December in the year 2014. This is our second program of this week. We are beginning 1/2 hour late, as we regularly do on Tuesday, due to the fact that I usually have a Rotary meeting on Tuesdays that runs from noon to 1. Although it was canceled today, it was postponed today. We're gonna go this evening. You'll remember that when we were doing these programs several months ago, when we were doing these virtual center programs from 3 to 5 in the afternoon, I used to have to beg off because of these evening meetings occasionally with the Rotary Club. Well, now we're having them regularly at noon, but tonight we're having a kind of a special meeting. We're going to be on the road. We're visiting a local car dealership here, and a good friend of mine is a partner in buying out this automobile dealership here, and they're kind of having an open house, and they want the Rotary folks to come and see their operation and all that. So I'm kind of looking forward to it. I have a very, very fond feeling with my friend. We've been friends for more than 20 years. He's a great guy, Concord University graduate, good friend of mine, and he's done very well. And he has been working in Florida for a number of years, but he came back to southern West Virginia, I believe, principally because of the opportunities available to him in this dealership. So we'll be going there this evening. But that's kind of a long way around the fact that we are beginning 1/2 hour later today than we usually do. We will take our break at the top of the hour, as we often do, a rather short one. We abbreviated, and we only have a half an hour in our, in half of our first hour. It usually makes the break a little bit less necessary. But at least we can make it shorter. What I'll use that opportunity to do is rush out there, fire up the Keurig, and freshen up my coffee and bring it back, and we'll be ready to roll in an hour or two. I want to, first of all, I want to thank all of you for your support, for your loyalty to the Head On Radio Network and to the Virtual Center. I really appreciate it. And, sometimes we've talked about this before. I'm going to mention it again because Bob and I were just talking about this before we went on the air. When you don't get any callers, it's hard for me to judge whether in fact the program is going over the way it's intended. Sometimes I have a very, very good feeling that a particular program or a particular topic has been effective. And what I mean by that is it's my responsibility, and sometimes, obviously, I think we all have experienced this. Sometimes we're on the top of our game, and sometimes we're not. And so it's feedback as much as anything else that'll oftentimes give us an opportunity to measure success or something a little bit less than success. But when you don't have callers and you don't have that feedback, it's a little bit difficult at the end. I know yesterday, for example, last evening, my wife came in from work, and she asked how the program went, and I just kind of shrugged my shoulder and said, "It went okay, I guess." And because I really didn't know. And she said, "What did you talk about?" And I told her what we had talked about. And I said, I was a little bit uncomfortable in a sense because I shared an awful lot of primary source material, quotes and sentences and pieces of sentences and short paragraphs and all that from a number of different people to make the point. And the reason I did it is because I didn't want people to think that this was something that I dreamed up as a possibility because of one or two particular sources. What I wanted to make clear was that there's a wide variety. There's the word is plethora of indications of resources available would suggest how real yesterday's topic really was. So anyway, I mentioned to my wife that it was a little bit difficult to evaluate the quality of the program because I didn't know whether it went over well or not. Well, the interesting thing is since then I've had a couple of pieces of feedback, and one of them is from Bob Kincaid, before we started our program today, which indicated that I had a call last night. My brother was listening to the program yesterday. He called last night and mentioned that he had been tuned in for better than an hour, and that a lot of it, he thought it was really interesting because he said a lot of the stuff I had never heard of. I didn't know about all these things, and of course he didn't know about my personal experience with the wine tasting when I didn't get a job either. So that was new also. He was focused on that, but the fact of the matter is, and I mentioned yesterday as an introduction that this is a little bit of a sensitive topic. And I'd like to continue it today. I don't want to beat it to death, but on the other hand, I want to be able to say that we are, in effect, doing it justice, because I really believe it's important. In fact, to be very honest with you, when I think about the mission and the goals that produced the idea for the virtual center in the first place, it's based on the idea that there are certain givens or certain issues that are critical in the society if this society is going to work the way those of us who would classify ourselves as optimists or idealists believe it can work and should work. I believe, and sometimes, we're overly critical in the sources we look at, and it can cause misinterpretation in a way. I know that we spend a lot of time looking at perhaps some of the more negative issues as some of the questionable elements associated with the operation of the republic and the structure of the government and the assumptions of the founders and those kinds of things. But the fact of the matter is I really believe that I'm a very optimistic, idealistic person. I believe in this system. I believe it can be better. I believe that if there is such a thing as American exceptionalism, it is based on the objectives or the goals of what the society potentially is about. I separate myself from those who advocate or who subscribe to the idea of American exceptionalism based on the idea that the best of America has already been achieved. We have made it. I don't believe so. I don't think that we've begun to accomplish or to achieve what we can achieve in this society. I believe that very, very firmly. When I look at situations like what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri right now, it kind of it's a bad reminder, but it's a reminder nonetheless that we've got a long way to go in order to begin to approach the ideals and to meet the challenge that the founders laid before us. Benjamin Franklin, in leaving the convention hall on the 17th of September, reputedly made the comment when he left the hall when somebody said, "What have we got?" And Franklin, supposedly said, "A republic if we can keep it." And basically what that suggests is that a republic is a work in progress. It can always be better. It can never be better. It's never good enough. And the fact of the matter is, when we see a situation like we're looking at in Ferguson, for example, we begin to realize how far we have to go and how much we have to accomplish before we begin to approach the ideals that the founders laid out for us. I believe that we have the potential of becoming an exceptional society. I believe in American exceptionalism is something in our future, not in our present, and definitely not in our past. And I think it's something we have to constantly work at. It's like marriage, it seems to me. Good marriages don't just happen. They become good because the parties involved are willing to work very hard in making them happen. And what that means is, it's not what you do for your partner. I believe oftentimes more important is what you don't do, what you don't say. The more you get to know your partner, the more you begin to know where the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses are. You know what to stay away from. You know what not to say. And you know where the hot button issues are. And if you're shrewd and sensitive, you'll stay away from those. And recognizing all the time that the same thing is happening on the other side of the aisle, from the partner's point of view as well. You've got weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. We have issues. We have foibles. We have insecurities. We have all of these things that our partners know. And what makes for a successful marriage, it seems to me, is that you develop the kind of affection and the kind of respect for each other that makes you realize that the worst thing you can do is be responsible for hurting the person that you care about the most. And so therefore you work at it by avoiding it. It's not what you do sometimes, it's what you don't do or what you don't say. The issues that you let go, where you don't draw a line in the sand all the time and make a major issue out of one thing after the other, because what you're basically doing them is just causing problems. And obviously the other person is going to try to retaliate, and once you get into a tit-for-tat thing where each side is trying to hurt the other a little bit more, then you're in trouble. It seems to me that a republic is that way. And I think that what that means is everybody's got to keep their eye on the ball, so to speak, and recognize what's necessary in order for a republic to work. Obviously, the ideals that the founders had about civic virtue in 1776 were a little bit overly optimistic, no question. Because what they were talking about is perfection as being achievable based on the structure of government they created. Recognizing, of course, that the structure of government they created demanded a degree of civic virtue, a willingness to implement in people's lives, in people's day-to-day lives, the golden rule of doing to others as you would have them do unto you. That what you're looking for is a society that is moving in the direction of making that directive, the so-called golden rule, real. We've made progress. We have a lot more to go. We have a lot further to go. But I really believe, and that's why I'm here with the Virtual Center, I really believe that it's possible, and I think it's something that all of us need to continue to pursue. It's not a question, human nature, of people being bad or evil. Neither is it a question of people being angels either. Madison's right. Madison was right. If we were angels, we wouldn't need government at all. But the fact of the matter is we got to be moving in that direction. And what that means is we've got to be willing, it seems to me, to adhere and stick to our guns and never vary from the principles and the ideals that potentially make America great. I believe that. I didn't, when we went on the air today, I didn't necessarily believe or plan to be into a rap like this at the very beginning of the program, but I believe it very sincerely. And, you know, I mentioned yesterday, in yesterday's program, a couple of personal situations in my own life that caused me to realize that I was being penalized for things that I couldn't possibly know or be able to do. Pick wine at an elegant dinner, for God's sake. You know, that's one thing. But the point of it is, all of us have been there. All of us have been in that. And what we have to do is become big enough as a society to realize that you don't measure the worth of people based on those kinds of things. You can learn how to choose wine. You can learn how to pick wine. It always seemed to me, in fact, this is kind of a little bit of a joke on that wine story a little bit, but when I grew up, I always believed that screw tops on wine bottles were a heck of a lot more convenient than corks. Little did I know that it's only the cheap stuff that comes with the screw tops. It's the real stuff that comes with the corks. And so anyway, these are the kind of issues, but they are real issues because they affect real people. And I'd like to spend our time together today pursuing this a little bit. I think that we have to be a little bit careful not to become too judgmental on either side. I think that we need to realize that the founders, like us, were struggling with these kinds of things. Oftentimes they weren't sure. I love to believe that when we look at sources and look at what people put in letters and things, letters to colleagues and speeches and those kinds of things, that oftentimes what they are doing is floating trial balloons. They are basically taking ideas or theories that they have and throwing them out there to see what kind of a response they get. And what that indicates to me oftentimes is that people aren't sure. They think this might be something that is worth pursuing, but they really aren't sure, and they're looking for feedback. And therefore, when you begin to see that in the founders, you begin to appreciate the fact that these are real people. We were looking, obviously, in yesterday's program at Gordon Wood's book. And there's one paragraph, one short section here that I just wanted to share with you. And these are Gordon Wood's words. This is not a quote from the 18th century or anything else. This is his conclusion. But I think it says so much. In the Federalist mind, therefore, the struggle over the Constitution was not one between kinds of wealth or property, or one between commercial or non-commercial elements of the population, but rather it represented a broad social division between those who believed in the right of a natural aristocracy to speak for the people and those who did not. It gets into the issue of deference. It gets into the extent to which we are raised, encouraged, taught to defer to our betters. But on the other hand, it's important to recognize that that deference can be abused. On the one hand, on the positive side, deference is earned when merit is evident. In other words, I don't see anything wrong with deferring to somebody whose wisdom and judgment on particular issues has demonstrated that they have particular qualifications to make decisions in certain areas. I don't see a problem with that at all. That's a good side of deference. But on the other hand, when deference is based on things that aren't real or don't matter or that people can't do anything about, like the color of their skin, or the religious beliefs that they were raised with, or the accent that they speak with, or the experiences that they had growing up, or the experiences that they did not. And what becomes evident is that some people are deficient in things that a lot of other people know. But to be critical, to be negative toward the people who are deficient in those areas is to suggest that these people had the opportunity to correct that deficiency and did not. And I don't think in many, many cases that's true. This morning, this is a little bit of an aside, but This morning I was listening to a radio program that I listen to all the time, frequently when I'm in the car. It's ESPN. It's a sports talk program. I'm particularly fond of the fellow that with ESPN that does a talk show in the mornings, Colin Cowherd, his name is. And he's on in the mornings from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. actually, each day. And I particularly like his program because he seems to have a lot to say. And he's opinionated, he says what he thinks, and I enjoy the program. Anyway, he was talking about an issue this morning that I think many of you, of listeners here at the Virtual Center, are probably aware of, and of course that's the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. And some of you who are not sport fans may not recognize this, but Sunday, during the National Football League games on Sunday, the St. Louis Rams came out of the tunnel for the start of the game, and 4 or 5 of the members of the Rams team were holding up their arms almost in surrender, don't shoot mode, obviously suggesting what's going on in Ferguson, the demonstrations about the shooting of Michael Brown. And based on that demonstration, there has been a lot of comment and a lot of criticism of these football players for daring to venture into a political issue like that. And a number of people have made comments like, these guys are professional football players. Why don't they just play football and leave the politics to somebody else? Or how do they know, or what do they know about the realities of the politics of this situation? They're just professional athletes. How can they possibly know? Colin Cowherd made a point this morning, which I thought was incredibly profound. And he made the point that these people are football players. That's what they do for a living. But that does not mean that they cease to be citizens because they play football. And the reality is that the nation is very, very positive when football teams and football players and the league itself gets behind particular causes that everybody agrees with, like breast cancer. How many, for example, football teams have you seen where they're wearing insignias, or they're wearing, they have pink towels or pink football cleats or whatever, in order to make the case or make the point for research, for donations and contributions to the support of research on breast cancer and things like that? When football players make themselves heard on issues that we agree with, this is Colin Cowherd's point, we're very comfortable with that. But when they say something that we don't agree with, then we tend to be very critical. It seems to me what we've got to do is open up those areas, talk about them, and examine them. We need to be aware, because he's right. These people may play football, but they are also citizens, and they have a right to have an opinion and to participate in the issues of the day, as all of us do. And I think we need to respect that. We are just going on 55 minutes after the hour, so we've got about 5 minutes left before we take our break. And here I am. I've been going for 25 minutes, and I haven't even given you a phone number yet. Am I wound up or what? We would love to hear from you, especially on this issue. This is such a sensitive one. The phone number that we have reserved to get you on the air is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-HORN, H-O-R-N. If you would like to email me directly on these issues, I would love to hear from you, and I'll do the best I can to respond. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's W-A O'Brien, I-E-N, 906, all one word, at gmail.com. I'd like to go back before we take our break at the top of the hour and share this statement by Gordon Wood, which I think is a profound one. In the Federalist mind, the struggle over the Constitution was not one between kinds of wealth or different kinds of property, or between commercial interests and non-commercial interests, or between commerce and manufacturing, or between finance and banking and planters or whatever, which is often the focus of so many people trying to explain it. The real division in society over the Constitution, Gordon Wood says, represented a broad social division between those who believed in the right of a natural aristocracy to speak for the people and those who did not. I would suggest that I don't think Gordon Wood goes far enough there. Because as a qualifier, the idea of the natural aristocracy, the idea of deference to our betters, I believe is something that all of us can support. But when the natural aristocracy, or when those to whom we defer, abuse the position, or use their position to belittle, or to downgrade, or to insult, or to embarrass those who are deferring to them, then I think the right of the natural aristocracy to speak for the vast majority of people becomes very questionable. And I think that's what we're dealing with. I think it's very simple. There are a number of spin-off issues here that I think all of us need to think about. There are those who will take advantage of the divisions within society for their own personal benefit. For lack of a better term, we tend to call them demagogues. People who claim to speak for the people at large, but are in reality much more interested in their own agenda than they are the public interest. But on the other hand, there are those who speak for the people who are generally committed to trying to do something positive for people that they believe they can help. How do you separate between those those groups of people? How do you separate or distinguish between the demagogues and the public servants? I think that's a subject that all of us would do well to spend a little bit of time thinking about. But the fact of the matter is, as I mentioned yesterday, all of us have been in a situation at some point in our lives when we feel out of pocket, when we feel that we're a little bit out of our element, that we aren't comfortable. When you go to a situation or into a situation or to a particular event, and you've never been there before, and you kind of sidle into the room, as it were, and you kind of hang in the background until you size up the situation. What's going on here? Where do I go? Do I fit? How do I fit? How much of this do I understand? How much of this am I comfortable with? We are looking to try to adjust or to resolve the conflicts, if you will, between our own personal comfort zone and the particular social situation that we find ourselves in. I mentioned yesterday the issue of sitting down at the dinner table and suddenly recognizing that there's more silverware on the table than you ever knew existed in your life. Why, in God's world, do people need 3 forks and 4 spoons and 2 knives and 3 glasses and a big plate and a small plate and a bowl? And what do I do for this? And is this plate to put food on, or is this plate to put bones in, or is this plate to put the skin off the chicken on, or whatever? And so consequently, we tend to look around and look and try to find the people that seem to be the most comfortable, and then we mimic them. And basically what we hope is we'll be able to get through this without embarrassing ourselves. If you've ever felt in that kind of a position, then I think the issue that I would like you to think about is how much of that position is your fault. And how much of our system of education and rearing our young is geared towards preparing people for those kinds of situations. Is it possible to educate people in ways which will enable them to overcome and avoid those kinds of situations? John Dewey, the famous Harvard authority on education, I said Harvard, and I'm not sure. Maybe it's Columbia. But anyway, John Dewey made used to make the point all the time in promoting educational reform. He was the father of progressivism in education. And his whole point was, in educating youngsters, the classroom ought to mimic the society at large. What you want the educational experience to be for the young is preparation for the life that they will experience outside the classroom. So therefore, what you want the classroom experience to be, as much as possible, is a dry run on many or most of the social and political situations that these students are liable to find themselves in. And so the ideal there, or the assumption is, that we can indeed educate people so that they can basically function and function well in mainstream society. I guess the question I'm asking you to think about is, in fact, is that true? Can you educate people? Are we basically, by putting so much emphasis on standardized test scores and on measuring the performance of our schools and our teachers, are we sacrificing the kinds of real, pragmatic education that our young people need? Are we shortchanging our kids? And is there a way that we can do what we do better? It seems to me all of these questions kind of fly around in the air as we look at this issue. We have gone a minute or two beyond the top of the hour. I'd like to pause for just a couple of minutes, take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll try to get back into the 18th century a little bit and look at the founders. Let's revisit a few of the statements that they made yesterday in order that we can basically understand the situation to the point that we can get our arms around it, and then maybe talk about it and figure out if there's anything we can do about it. You are listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I'm Bill O'Brien. We are at the top of the first hour of our program. We have one full hour to go. I invite you to stay tuned. Thank you. Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to Hour 2 of today's program of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a Tuesday, the second day of December in the year 2014. If you are just joining us, welcome. If you have been with us through the first half hour of our program today, I want to thank you for staying tuned. The topic is the issue of the social question in terms of understanding the period that we have labeled, for lack of a better term, the period of the founding, the period from the Declaration through the Confederation period and through the ratification of the Constitution, to be more precise. We are looking at the issue that is most frequently defined as the social question. We've been looking principally at the tremendous job, scholarly research job done by Gordon Wood in his book, The Creation of the American Republic, written in the 1960s. It is a fantastic, fantastic study. I know that Gordon Wood's book in the 90s, his Radicalism, the American Revolution, won the Pulitzer Prize. But I really do believe that the creation of the American Republic is one of the finest pieces of scholarship I've ever come across. And as I mentioned the other day, I had the opportunity to tell Gordon Woods that straight to his face, and I cherish that opportunity because I was able to take advantage of his presence here in West Virginia a couple of years ago. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-HORN, H-O-R-N. And if you'd like to communicate with me via email, I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. We've been talking about the social question, and during the break, while I was waiting for the Keurig to do its thing, I came upon yet another paragraph from Gordon Wood that I would like to share with you a little bit, because I think that in the process of addressing this issue, Gordon Wood is laying down for us some really important principles and issues. Here's one which I found particularly interesting. Thus, Gordon Wood said, the Anti-Federalists were not only directly challenging the conventional belief that only a gentlemanly few, even though now in America naturally and not artificially qualified, were best equipped through learning and experience to represent and to govern the society, but they were as well indirectly denying the assumption of organic social homogeneity on which republicanism rested. Without fully comprehending the consequences of their arguments, the Anti-Federalists were destroying the great chain of being, thus undermining the social basis of republicanism and shattering that unity and harmony of social and political authority which the 18th century generally, and indeed most revolutionary leaders, had considered essential to the maintenance of order. That is what Gordon Wood's conclusion is about the issue of the social question as well. In raising these issues around the Constitution of the United States, the Anti-Federalists were raising questions which, according to Gordon Wood, inadvertently, I don't think it's inadvertent in some cases, I think some of the Anti-Federalist leadership knew very well what they were doing, but inadvertently, according to Gordon Wood, what Anti-Federalist leaders were doing was contradicting the realities and the assumptions on which Republican government was based. Namely, that in a republic, society needed to be seen as a homogeneous, organic whole. And that the existence of divisions or classes or factions or different interests within the society take a secondary role to the organic nature of the society as a whole. This, if you remember back to the document we looked at some time ago by John Winthrop, when he was talking about the idea of community in the Bible Commonwealth, so to speak, of colonial Massachusetts, John Winthrop talked about the fact that in order to make the society work, in order to make the community whole, its members had to interact together, they had to share together, they had to laugh together, they had to suffer together, they had to enjoy life's joys together and experience life's pains together. That in reality, in order to have a real community, as God had intended, what was necessary is that people needed to be willing to put aside their own concerns and their own self-interests and put the best interests of the whole always in the forefront. This the founders referred to as civic virtue. This was the basis of republicanism. And what Gordon Wood's point is that the more the Anti-Federalists played up the class issue as being a driver or an explanation, if you will, for the differences over the Constitution, the more they were contradicting the very nature of Republican government which they claimed to support. But the fact of the matter is we are talking about the Anti-Federalist spokesman here. We're talking about the Richard Henry Lees and the Patrick Henrys and the others. The Sam Adamses. We are not talking about the people who are oftentimes on the receiving end of society's distribution of goods, equitable distribution of goods and services. I want to share with you an issue about one of these people which I am fairly convinced that none of us have ever heard of. He is from Maine. His name, Samuel Nasson, Nasson. He was an anti-federalist. He was an anti-federalist representative to the ratifying convention in Massachusetts. And you may remember that when the ratifying convention was convened in Massachusetts, the majority of those elected to the ratifying convention were anti-federalists. If the vote were taken right away on the Constitution of the United States, the makeup of the ratifying convention in Massachusetts would have dictated that the Constitution would not have been ratified in Massachusetts. So consequently, the Massachusetts story of ratification revolves around the efforts of Federalists to scurry about and find ways to change the temper of that convention so that enough people who were elected to vote no on the Constitution would be willing to vote yes. One of the things that they were able to do in order to pull that off was to win the support of Samuel Adams. And they were able to do that to the point that Samuel Adams went before the ratifying convention and urged his colleagues, many of whom were elected to vote no, to give the Constitution a chance. But even more profound than the role of Sam Adams in the Massachusetts ratifying convention was the role of John Hancock, the governor. John Hancock was persuaded to endorse ratification of the Constitution with the promise that he most likely would be Vice President of the United States. Because everybody knew that Washington was going to be elected president, and it logically stood to reason that the vice president would have to be a New Englander. And Federalists promised to do all they could to help John Hancock secure that nomination, if indeed he would use his influence in order to get the Constitution ratified in Massachusetts. We know, of course, that the Federalist thinking in Massachusetts was half right. Indeed, the first vice president was a New Englander, but it wasn't John Hancock. It was John Adams. But the fact of the matter is, one of the members of the Massachusetts ratifying convention was Samuel Nasson. The leaders of the anti-federalist movement in Massachusetts, the leading opponents of the Constitution, Elbridge Gerry and James Warren, were defeated as candidates to the ratifying convention, and consequently Samuel Nason suddenly became one of the anti-federalist leaders and spokesmen against the Constitution at the ratifying convention. Who was Samuel Nason? And I'm getting this information from Gordon Wood's book. Samuel Nason was a shopkeeper who lived in Maine, which at that time was part of Massachusetts. He had previously been a member of the General Court in Massachusetts, but he had declined re-election to the court because he had been too keenly made aware, and this is a quote, of the want of a proper education that I feel myself so small on many occasions that I almost shrink into nothing besides I am often obliged to borrow from gentlemen that have advantages which I have not. Unquote. Can I read that again? This shopkeeper from Maine, Samuel Nason, who ends up becoming a leading spokesman for the anti-federalist forces in the Massachusetts ratifying convention, had served as a member of the Massachusetts General Court, but refused to run for re-election because he had been embarrassed and belittled by his colleagues in the General Court, which is what the legislature of Massachusetts was called. The implication here from this quote is that Nason had been so humiliated that he shrank into nothingness and decided that the best thing he could do was not run for re-election because he wasn't considered qualified. And he admits that he found himself on occasions borrowing from gentlemen who had advantages which he didn't have. Now he had moved into the position of leadership of the anti-federalist forces in the Massachusetts ratifying convention. He was, according to Rufus King, a letter from Rufus King, fully charged with gas. He became one of the grumblers that Rufus King said in a letter to Madison, who was more afraid of the proponents of the Constitution than of the Constitution itself. Think about that. Here's a shopkeeper from Maine that Rufus King is referring to as a grumbler in a letter to James Madison. One of the grumblers who are more afraid of the people who support the Constitution than they are the Constitution itself. What does that say? One thing it says is that basically the amount of attention and time that we spend trying to understand the internal structure of the Constitution of the United States might really be misplaced. Maybe the real story of ratification is right here. Because more and more we see evidence from the sources that anti-federalists really believe that the Constitution of the United States was an aristocratic plot to keep them down and keep them in their place. Yesterday we were in the Carolinas, and we looked at a statement in which one member, anti-federalist from North Carolina, said, quote, "They were browbeaten by many of those Ciceros as they think themselves and others of superior rank. They were belittled. They were humiliated. They were browbeaten. They were embarrassed. And consequently, the anti-federalists really didn't stand much of a chance of defeating the Constitution, even though in real terms the Constitution in an ideal world would never have been ratified. This was a tactic or a strategy which was employed, in some places at least, to secure ratification when ratification was not possible in any other way. One of the people who's in the Samuel Nasson category is Abraham Yates of New York. He's one of the 3 New York delegates to the Constitutional Convention. Yates, Lansing, and Alexander Hamilton, who is a practicing attorney in New York. These 3 are the New York delegates to the Constitutional Convention. Yates and Lansing are elected as anti-federalists. They end up to be opposed to the Constitution of the United States. Hamilton, of course, becomes one of the Constitution's biggest supporters. He ends up writing most of the Federalist Papers in support of that document. Yates was one of these people who believed that the real issue surrounding ratification was the social issue. I'm lining up a quote here by Abraham Yates. Yates said that the events of the 1780s, and this is a quote, the Treasury, the Order of the Cincinnati, which we talked about yesterday, this was the group of retired military officers that were seen as an elitist group and were forced to go into hiding. Washington was forced to not belong to the group because he would be embarrassed. The Treasury, the Order of the Cincinnati, and other public creditors, with all of their concomitants, were somehow or other inseparably connected, Yates said. They were all part of a grand design concerted by a few tyrants to undo the revolution and to establish an aristocracy in order to lord it over the rest of their fellow citizens, to trample the poorer part of the people under their feet, and that they may be rendered their servants and slaves. If you ever needed a statement which defined the realities of the social issue, the social question on ratification, it's this quote from Abraham Yates. The events of the 1780s, the Treasury, the Order of the Cincinnati, and other public creditors, with all their concomitants, were somehow or other inseparably connected, were all parts of a grand design concerted by a few tyrants to undo the revolution and to establish an aristocracy in order to lord it over the rest of their fellow citizens, to trample the poorer part of the people under their feet, that they may be rendered their servants and slaves. Melancthon Smith, anti-federalist elected to the New York ratifying convention for the Constitution. It is our singular felicity that we have no legal or hereditary distinctions in America, but still there are real differences. Quote, every society naturally divides itself into classes. Birth, education, talents, and wealth create distinctions among men as visible and of as much influence as titles, stars, and garters. Everyone knew that those whom nature had destined to rule possessed the qualifications of authority, such as the kind of dictatorial air, the magisterial voice, the imperious tone, the haughty countenance, the lofty look, the majestic mien. We are talking here about a tone of genuine bitterness. This goes way beyond issues of envy. This borders on the issues of hatred, of real bitterness. I would suggest to you that, to me, what it defines not only is an issue that must be considered in order to understand the ratification of the Constitution of the United States, but more important, it seems to me to reflect an issue that must be addressed if republicanism is to work. You cannot, once the Constitution is ratified, bury all of this stuff and say none of it matters anymore, we got the Constitution. Because the vitriol and the venom that's so evident in the way these people are lashing out at those who they believe are committed to keeping them down and lording over them their wealth and their position and their language and their distinction, the clothes they wear and all the rest of it. It seems to me that what this does more than anything else is speak to a challenge that Republican government must address if republicanism is ever to work the way it was conceived to work. I would suggest that the situation in Ferguson, which is the most current situation that I can think of, goes a long way towards suggesting that we have quite a ways to go before we are able to successfully address this issue. It surfaces in so many ways, in so many small ways. And when I say small, what I mean is big ways for the individuals involved, but small when looked upon against the big picture. Let me be honest. The story that I shared yesterday about being asked to choose the wine at this dinner, this interview dinner that I was invited to, was embarrassing. I didn't get the position. I knew I didn't get the position. I knew I wouldn't get the position. In fact, the comment I made at the time, which said that the ability to select wine was not part of the job description, was my feeble effort at lashing out at a situation which I felt was patently unfair. But later that night, I went back to the hotel room, and my wife was eagerly waiting for me there and couldn't wait for us to go down to the cocktail lounge in the hotel, order a drink, a late night drink at 11:30 at night, and share with her the experience of my interview. And I can remember sitting there looking in her eyes because she was so excited about the prospect of me landing a position like this, and I knew in my heart that I didn't have a chance. And I was a little bit uncomfortable explaining why. I was embarrassed. I wasn't embarrassed because I couldn't choose the wine. I was embarrassed because I was forced to admit in front of all of these people that I couldn't choose the wine. I was forced to admit that my background and my upbringing did never provided me with an opportunity to learn how to choose the wine, which meant that the mere fact that they asked me to do this was an insult to my parents. It was an insult to everything they did to try to raise me properly and make sure that I got the kind of education that would open up opportunities just like this. But what I had found was that apparently the world was not ready to accept the realities of what this nation supposedly was about, which was the idea of social mobility and the idea that everybody in this society, no matter where you start, can go as far as their own willingness to work and their own talents and all the rest of it could take them. I had learned firsthand that we weren't there yet. In fact, I had learned that the people sitting around that table didn't want to be there. For them, learning that I was not able to order the wine was exactly what they wanted to find out at that dinner. For them, the evening was a total success because they now had substantive basis, substantive information on which to cross me off the list of potential candidates for that position. So for them, it was a good evening. For me, it was a humiliating evening. But the humiliation didn't start in the restaurant, didn't end in the restaurant. I had to go back and explain to my wife what had happened and why I really believed that I didn't have a chance to get this job. And then as we drove back the next day, the hour and a half drive that it took to get back home, my wife focused principally on reassuring me that everything is all right and we didn't need this job and there'll be other jobs and all the things that somebody who loves you is supposed to say when you hurt. But the reality is, when you hurt for reasons that you could not do anything about, ever, it's a hurt that doesn't go away. Your senses are up. You're looking for opportunities like that in the future. You're looking for further evidences of that. think of the situation in school, in grade school. Think back to the kids who, when papers were turned back in any class, the kids who got the D's and F's. And year after year after year, through their entire educational experience, they received D's and F's in any number of classes from any number of people that they had never met before. And what that does to the self-confidence of these people. You can talk social mobility from now till doomsday. You can talk about opportunity and the educational opportunities available in America and all of that. But how do you overcome this? How do you do it? How do you mend or repair an ego that has been pounded into the ground year after year after year, until by the time you get to the end of the educational opportunity, there's not much left. You've been beaten about as far down as one can be beaten. In fact, the miracle is you're still in school. And if the law didn't require you to be in school until you were 16, you wouldn't be there. But by this time, you have probably adopted the behavior, the kind of defense mechanism associated with this. You became the troublemaker. You become the class clown. You become the person that sends a message to to classmates that you really don't care. It's all a joke. It's all a game. It doesn't matter anyway. What do I care? All the behavior which in your mind helps to ease the pain a little bit, but in the mind of those who are managing the institution, those who are grading you, your teachers and principals and all the rest of it, it reinforces the fact that all the D's and all the F's that you got for all of those years were right on target. Because the behavior that you are exhibiting now is proof positive that these teachers from years gone by knew what they were talking about when they labeled you an F, when they labeled you a failure. And these are the kind of people that Jefferson spoke of as being part of what he calls an educated citizenry necessary to make republicanism work. I would suggest that what makes this issue particularly pertinent is that it's an issue that we've got to address. We have got to confront it, and first of all, we've got to even recognize it. We've got to be willing to recognize it. And we've got to find ways to first of all, to see it, and then to find ways to deal with it. And so the question that I have, we saw yesterday in some of the quotations that we were looking at, that some of the founders, I'm thinking specifically of Benjamin Rush, some of the founders believed that the way to deal with this was through education or through religion. And some people believed, obviously, that the religious message or that the religious issue was the cure-all. Once we were able to convince people that they needed to behave the way Christians are supposed to behave, then we would go a long way towards relieving a lot of these issues. Rush believed that you could educate people in such a way that you could overcome a lot of these deficiencies. John Dewey believed that if you looked upon the classroom as a laboratory for the society at large, then you could project and prepare your young people for whatever experiences they might come into contact with in the real world. That's the basis of the whole educational experience anyway. I guess the question that I'm raising, because I don't know the answer, is it really possible to resolve these issues and do it in an educational setting? Is education the way to do it? The irony is, for me, and we're kind of moving, we're right at the 3/4 hour of our second hour, so we've got about 15 minutes left in our program today. But I'd like to address the issues of education and religion and suggest the possibility that maybe both of them together might be the answer. First of all, let's look at education. It seems to me that what is clearly not the answer to dealing with some of these issues in education is the content-based, rote effort to communicate truth in textbooks and curriculum plans and lectures and all the rest of it. I'm thinking of Plato's allegory of the cave, and Plato's message that so many people believe that truth is something that comes from outside and is introduced into the individual child. What Plato points out is that true education involves bringing out the wisdom and the knowledge that's already there. In other words, working on the psyche of the child, and allowing the individual student to recognize and to realize that within themselves already they've got what they need to find the answers. What they need to happen is to be induced to seek the answers in the face of many people out there who claim to be able to tell them what the answers are. Our education system is based on the idea that there's a right answer to everything and that we never have it. The book has it, the teacher has it, the curriculum guide has it, the State Board of Education has it. Somebody has it, but we don't. In religion, Scripture has it. You want to find the truth? Go to the Bible. What Plato is suggesting is the pursuit of truth by every individual is really what education is about. And the true teacher is the person who can light the fire that causes people to seek the truth, to want to find the truth, and to begin looking for it. I've mentioned this before. The founders believed that truth was discovered, that the individual had to be committed to the idea of pursuing truth and finding it. Truth was something that you discovered. Truth was never something that was revealed to you by somebody else. It might be their truth, but from your perspective, it's not yours. So what we have is, I believe, is an educational establishment which is built around the assumption that society has the truth And education is merely an opportunity to give students the opportunity to be exposed to the truth. I think that when we really begin to look at education this way, we begin to respect people as people. We begin to respect every individual, as a human being. As a person who has been assigned to us, we have been given the charge of helping this student begin the process of pursuing the truths that help explain what life is about and why we're here. And for some reason in our education system, instead of doing that, we tend to squelch the truth. We tend to squelch the pursuit of truth. We tend to turn out students who could care less what the truth is. All they want to do is get out of here. And then in the area of religion, we have my truth and your truth and Buddha's truth and Gandhi's truth and Muhammad's truth and Jesus' truth. Which one's right? Well, we are blessed in this society to have had people with the skills and the abilities to lay out these issues in such a way that they give us the opportunity to see that there's more in common with all of these different religious versions of truth than there is disagreement. But because of the tree, each tree being a different denomination, if you will, or a different religion, because each religion is so adamant that it already possesses the truth, that it is unwilling to accept the reality that the tree next to it might possess a little bit of truth also. If we could find a way to overcome all of that and to begin to find ways that all of us can agree on the basic elements that unite us and make us all human beings, all children of God, then it seems to me we would be awfully close to the educational strategy identified or defined by Plato. All of it goes back to the same place. All of it goes back to the value of the human being, to the value of the human soul, and to the potential of the human soul to commit his life or her life to finding truth. A world, irrespective of how many different religious denominations there are, how many different races and colors there are, how many different nationalities and accents there are, a world made up of people who are willing to join together in order to find truth is a world that has much more in tandem, much more in common than it has to divide it. I would suggest to you, if we take this and go all the way back to the founders, that's really what republicanism is about. It's about dignity. It's about respect. It's about the ability of each of us to do for others. the Scottish Enlightenment folks and Jefferson and the other founders defined this as happiness. Happiness is not what you have. Happiness is what you have that you can use to the benefit of other people. That's where the happiness comes from. Jefferson knew that. The founders knew that. I can't help but think back several years ago when John Kaminsky was here in southern West Virginia on our first history grant. John telling a group of teachers that we had in the room, if you really want an experience that will demonstrate why it's so important to revisit the sources, to go back to the primary sources, John said, here's an experiment. Try it. Go back through the sources. In his case, the ratification papers, what has become Rotunda, the Rotunda Project. Look through the sources of the 18th century, the speeches and letters and journal entries of the founders, and focus on what they meant by happiness. And see if you're not surprised. Because what John knew and what was there for the rest of us to find out was that happiness revolved around what we could do for each other, not what each other can do for us. That, I would suggest to you, is the message. That's why this social question in relationship to the founding is so important. That's why the words and the statements and the inflections of people like Melancthon Smith and Abraham Yates and Samuel Nasson of Maine are so important, because in many ways they are telling us the truth. They are telling us what we need to hear. We just need to listen. We must begin to overcome, first to recognize, and then to begin finding ways to overcome those things which divide us, those things which make me believe that I'm better than you. Instead, I need to begin to focus on the thing that makes me like you, or better yet, what makes you like me. We talked about it in today's program in terms of marriage, in terms of making a successful marriage work. We talked about it in terms of what is necessary in order to make a republic work. Seems to me what we've got to do is to begin listening to each other. And what we've got to do is begin to recognize that all of us have worth and all of us have something positive to contribute to this community, to this republic that the founders have been so kind as to grant us. I would suggest the challenge is ours. It's 58 minutes after the hour.
Hey, Dr. Bill?
Yes, Bob?
I just wanted to jump in for a second.
Sure.
I had something I had neglected to mention to you, and listeners probably need to know too. We can't go tomorrow.
Okay.
I have a doctor's appointment at 1:15 tomorrow afternoon down in Charleston, so
Okay, Bob.
we will be foreclosed from being able to go live tomorrow.
So it'll be next Monday before we get a chance to revisit some of these issues.
Indeed, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you.
That's great. That's okay. That's fine. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you told me. Bob, thank you.
Thank you.
And all of you listening, please, thank you. Have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful evening.